to Soft-Spoken Storytime, Episode 41, continuing on with SCP-001. Codename Pigman/Blank, the Frontispiece. Warning: Cognitocatalytic agents. This file contains active instances of SCP-001 and other memetic material in photographic form. Personnel must ensure they have been recently inoculated with anti-meme 001 before proceeding. I.H. Pigman, Archivist Emeritus. H.R. Blank, Archivist. Log access and proceed. SCP-001, Level 4 Secret. Containment Class Aegis. Disruption Class Eki. Risk Class Notice. SCP-001 Selected Examples in situ. Special Containment Procedures. The maintenance of SCP-001 is paramount to the continued existence of the SCP Foundation and the Veil of Secrecy. Research into sustaining, extending, and strengthening its memetic properties is an Alpha-1 priority at all times. Individuals found resistant to SCP-001 are to be amnesticized, detained, or terminated where appropriate and or necessary. All SCP Foundation personnel rated above Class C must undergo anti-meme 001 inoculation. Description: SCP-001 is a memetic complex known internally as the Frontispiece. Residing in the human collective consciousness, it exerts an anomalous force upon all initialisms. Footnote 1. Abbreviations consisting of initials which are read and spoken individually. Containing the Latin letter sequences SCP. Without anti-meme 001 inoculation, considerable memetic conditioning and or thaumaturgic/ontokinetic capabilities. No human being encountering such initialisms is capable of mentally connecting them, or whatever objects, personages, or organizations they are applied to, with the SCP Foundation. The Frontispiece therefore allows the Foundation to operate public-facing front organizations which are simultaneously identifiable at a glance to agents in the field and veiled from hostile operatives or the general populace. For example, all Snooze and Cruise Palace franchise locations are also operate as Foundation safe houses, while Sawyer's Cheesy Pretzels eateries act as intelligence gathering hubs and launching points for mobile task force operations. Footnote 2. Snooze and Cruise Palace is a chain of novelty retro-style hotels and restaurants with over 200 locations, primarily in the southwestern United States. Footnote 3. Sawyer's Cheesy Pretzels is a chain known for specializing in soft pretzels seasoned with a variety of high-quality cheeses, operating locations in the United States, Canada, Mexico, the United Kingdom, Spain, and Japan. SCP-001 Instance. SCP. Skeptics of Conspiracy and the Paranormal. Stephen Osha. How much would a worldwide containment conspiracy cost? Amita Khan. No, our death row inmates aren't disappearing. Sheldon Katz. Anubis is not licensed to practice law in the state of. SCP-001-1 is the Sigil, a non-linguistic visual trigger mimicking the SCP-001 effect. See Addendum 001-3. Antimeme 001 is a thaumaturgically produced inoculant for SCP-001, supplied to all Foundation personnel on a regular schedule. The Frontispiece possesses a singular fault which to date remains unexplained by anomalous science. There is a non-zero chance that it will entirely fail to operate on individuals who frequently encounter anomalous phenomena, or who were exposed to it during their youth. Such individuals inevitably come to recognize the connection between Foundation front organizations and eventually the Foundation itself. This group most commonly occurs with agents belonging to groups of interest, hostile or not. It has been hypothesized that exposure to a presently unquantified element common to all anomalous phenomena carries an inoculant effect similar to that of Anti-Meme-001. SCP-001 was intentionally created and implemented by the Foundation in 1969 at the height of the Panopticon Crisis. Addendum 001-1 Panopticon Crisis Overview. In the 1960s, the SCP Foundation drew the ire of multiple national governments when it was discovered that Overwatch Command was simultaneously aiding and hindering all major players in the Cold War. Canada was among the first to withdraw support in 1964, after the actions of Data Expunged resulted in the violent death of Royal Canadian Mounted Police Sergeant Raynard Watts, chair of the Occult and Supernatural Activity Task Force. Israel and Lebanon mutually agreed to cut ties with the Foundation following the disastrous outcome of 1965's Operation Eighth Trumpet, footnote 4. While successful in halting an XK-class scenario, the damage to Tel Megiddo resulted in the loss of an unknown quantity of artifacts relevant to all Abrahamic faiths. In 1967, Egypt and several other North African states withdrew support after it was discovered that the stranding of the so-called Yellow Fleet in the Suez Canal was caused in part by the Foundation due to an anomaly in transport aboard the SCPS Conrad, breaching containment. Footnote 5. Publicly known as the Swedish ship MS Nippon. The most devastating withdrawals came from the United States of America and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. While providing material and personnel to the U.S. government during the Vietnam War, the Foundation was simultaneously working with communist regimes to secure both funding and a sustainable D-class personnel population. When President Lyndon B. Johnson was informed of Overwatch's involvement in the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1964, he terminated all financial, tactical, and personal arrangements, only allowing the Foundation to continue operations on U.S. soil after a United Nations resolution backed by the Global Occult Coalition. Footnote 6. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, prototype teleportation technology was provided to the Cuban government for the purpose of transporting radioactive material. In exchange for access to samples of Fidel Castro's hair and blood for use in a atomic contingency. The USSR was alerted to Foundation involvement in the development of the Enigmagraph and its extensive use of Western espionage operations. Footnote 7. Developed under Project Paperclip, the Enigmagraph is an anomalous derivative of the Nazi Enigma machine. Unlike the cipher-based encoding of an Enigma machine, the Enigmagraph creates messages that are only decipherable by the intended recipients. It was later a key element in Project Rosetta, resulting in the creation of 8ball.aic by the AIAD. The Foundation was ousted from many Soviet territories, only maintaining scattered sites outside Western Germany. This left the Foundation's sole strongholds in Japan, South America, Latin America, and the Bahamas. Even then, the relationship with Cuba had to be bolstered with donations of early-stage cloning technology to assist with Fidel Castro's failing health and need for organ donations. Each of the incidents described above was exacerbated by the intervention of a hostile agent identified as POL-001. Profile: POL-001. Name unknown. Occupation operative, various. Primary alias Elizabeth Crocker. Elizabeth Crocker joined the United States Central Intelligence Agency in 1959, brought on as part of MKISOLDA, and rising through the ranks until becoming personal assistant to Director John Alexander McCone. Footnote 8. A CIA research project focusing on the creation and weaponization of an anomalous religion dedicated to the worship of the United States of America. Shortly after joining the CIA, Crocker developed a romantic relationship with Dr. Alexander Hilbert, a CIA researcher responsible for the development of the quantum brace, an experimental AIM weapon capable of altering probability. Hilbert was killed in 1964 during a test of the quantum brace shortly after the Foundation attempted to recruit him. Crocker incorrectly believed the test was sabotaged by the Foundation following Hilbert's refusal of said offer, and subsequently leaked Overwatch's involvement in the Cuban Missile Crisis to President Johnson. Crocker is a Class 3 Magus Thaumaturge with training in cryptomancy, a branch of thaumaturgy dealing with anomalous symbology, language, and codes. Her training predates her recruitment into the CIA, though her exact date of birth and therefore the timeline of her training is unknown. On 10/19/1967, Crocker disguised herself as 057's personal driver and proceeded to shoot her over 12 times before leaving her body in front of a Foundation safehouse in San Francisco. A note was attached to the corpse. Do you know the secret of democracy? Here's the most common wrong answer. One man can make a difference. That's not democracy. At all, of course. It's autarky. One man making all the difference is no different from, say, 13 men doing it. Oh, the violence that misconception lets people like you perpetrate. It conditions us to tyranny in the name of the greater good, as defined by the lesser evil of tyrants. You want us all marching on to your master plan, and you don't care who has to get tread underfoot on the way. No, the real secret to democracy is that no two people want to make the same difference, and when they see how different their friends and neighbors and colleagues already are, it makes them so damn hopping mad. Nobody likes to confront the fact of someone else's reality. Nobody wants to toil towards someone else's utopia, and everybody loves to play the blame game. They've got a lot of grievances to lay blame for right now, and as luck would have it, they've also got a ready-made scapegoat sitting right under their noses. It's high time somebody broke up your tidy little racket. No, more than one somebody. Everybody. We're going to contain you, and you're going to suffocate. The assassination of 057 created a vacancy in the O5 Council that could not easily be filled, more often than not leaving Overwatch deadlocked on major decisions. This marked the beginning of what archives and revision personnel have subsequently termed the Panopticon Crisis. Due to the constant scrutiny from world governments, precipitated by POL 001, with the Foundation hemorrhaging resources and the increasing difficulty of operating in a clandestine manner, it was feared that an LV-2 Burning Veil scenario would ensue, culminating in an LV-0 Broken Masquerade scenario. On 11/23/1967, Overwatch Command issued a radio transmission to all surviving Foundation sites, ordering their personnel to attempt amelioration of this situation by any means at their disposal. Site 01 subsequently enacted complete radio silence, as Agent Crocker and a team of analog cryptographers were then finalizing the process of deciphering the Foundation's most secure communication ciphers. The following transcript is taken from a brainstorming meeting between several members of Foundation personnel trapped in Havana, Cuba, in January of 1968. Expand log 001-1. Personnel in attendance: Dr. Amity Noble, proxy for 0510. Dr. Vivian Leslie Scout, director, Site 43. Dr. Eric Euler, thaumatologist, footnote 9. Period term, the present-day terminology is thaumaturge. Agent Charles Correa, Mobile Task Force Oliver 19, contingency. Katie O'Donnell, Department of Accounting. Dr. Vladimir Dyer, former U.S. GOV liaison. Dr. Scout. Let's get it over with. I abhor this weather. Agent Correa. Gets over 60 and you start melting. Could you Canadians be any more stereotypical? O'Donnell. Now that we've got that jingoism out of the way, I have to be honest. We're pretty much screwed. This was the budget of December of 1966. O'Donnell presents a diagram to the group. And this is the amount of money we need if we want to maintain containment. O'Donnell presents a second diagram. Agent Correa. In one side, O'Donnell. For one anomaly, and not even Kita class, this is a bare-bones Euclid. Dr. Noble. How the heck did we manage to justify that to the president? To any president? Dr. Dyer. Depending on the country, you show them how communist or capitalist activity will result in an outbreak of anomalous something or other, and they will literally print money for us. O'Donnell. Meaning we tried to play poker with the world, and now we're not even allowed in the same room with the table. Ladies and gentlemen, we messed up. Dr. Dyer. This might be recoverable. We just need to direct the remaining funds into getting more money. Dr. Scout. How do you propose we do that exactly? Dr. Dyer. Your acrobatic attainment facility, Dr. Scout. Achromatic abatement. Footnote 10. The neutralization of anomalous waste matter. Dr. Dyer. Has to output some usable waste. You melt down religious artifacts, surely you can recover precious metals from them. Or maybe sell off a few patents? O'Donnell. Through what? Everywhere from Atlanta to Zanzibar has a list of what companies we ran, and they're all burned. Samson Palmer, New Light Ministries, 10th Wonder Publishing, and that's just in the USA. The Soviet Union is literally knocking over whole sites as we speak, and God knows where they're going, what they're doing to the anomalies contained there. Dr. Noble. This can't all have been Crocker. Agent Correa. Whacking a Senior 05 certainly sent everyone a message. Dr. Dyer. Crocker caused a lot of this, but it's like she said in her note. She got the ball rolling, and the whole world is running with it. Agent Correa. I'd just like to know what that freak in the room thinks. Dr. Scout. I beg your pardon? Agent Correa. Talking about Alistair Crowley here. Dr. Euler. I'm thinking. Silence on recording. It would conceivably be possible to weave an illusion over our front companies, but it would have to be a massive organization, constantly maintained by a complex set of glyphs and rituals. If we had access to orichalcus or a similar thermic power source, we could run it for maybe a year, 18 months at most. Footnote 11. Orichalcus, a crystalline storage medium able to contain large amounts of energy, data, or both simultaneously, originating in the sunken landmass of Sherd. O'Donnell. Not good enough. We need something bigger than that. We need the world to forget that the Foundation exists, just for a moment, so we can get back on our feet. Dr. Euler. I'm a thaumatologist, Katie, not a priest. What you're asking for is a miracle. Agent Correa. Once again, Euler proves why his kind should all be shot. Dr. Euler. I beg your effing pardon. Agent Correa. The fact that the Foundation allows anyone like you to walk outside of a cell is one of the reasons why you're in this bind. Dr. Euler stands and abruptly exits the room. Dr. Noble. Now would be a good time for a break, then. Following Dr. Euler's sudden exit from the meeting room, recording equipment picked up the following conversation between Dr. Euler and Dr. Scout. Dr. Scout. Eric, are you? Dr. Euler. Get away from me, Scout. Dr. Scout. I've never seen you act like that. What's... Dr. Euler. You heard the way Correa talked. Freak. Anyone like you. My kind. It... Dr. Euler lets out a sob. I lost my mother to Auschwitz, my sister and father to Dachau, and that ever thinks he can talk like that? Dr. Scout. Correa's a jackass, but I don't think he realizes that implication. We're all frustrated, and if anyone's responsible for this crisis, it's me. Dr. Euler. How do you figure? Dr. Scout. You read about Watts, that Mountie who got mauled by werewolves? Dr. Euler. That was someone at my site, trying to protect a friend. I shan't ask further, but you're saying Canada withdrew because of that? That and the fact that Pearson's running a minority government at the whim of an anti-Foundation opposition. All right mess we're in, Vivian. Euler sniffles. I'm not going back in there with Correa. I might set his tongue on fire if I did. Wait, that's it? I need to contact Canada. Good luck. I don't think there's a single phone line in this country connected to the continent, and even if there was, it's going to be wiretapped to hell. There's radio. At that point, why not just fire a missile into Mount Everest and carve a message from the rubble? Silence on recording. Tell me, do you have any thaumatologists in your employ at 43? The situation at Site 43 is best explained by the following report prepared for the Canadian Prime Minister by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Royal Canadian Mounted Police Occult and Supernatural Activity Task Force. On 01/03/1968, the Prime Minister revoked the provisional authority of the Secure, Contain, Protect Foundation to operate a subterranean research facility beneath military camp, Ipperwash, known internally as Site 43. Footnote 13. Officially, the SCP Foundation full name, presumed based on contextual clues. Department of Defense forces attempted to enter the site without effect on 01/07/1968. Therefore, 2 OSAT teams were dispatched. Teams McDonald and Steele entered Ipperwash Provincial Park without incident, but expected heavy resistance when attempting to enter the camp itself. Similar attempts on previous occasions have been thwarted by mythological figures belonging to the nearby Indian reserves, which typically ignore the soldiers stationed at Ipperwash. This experience was not repeated, however, though a number of supernatural beings residing in the woods and beneath Lake Huron observed the advancing teams, they made no effort to interfere. Team Steele's Grade 1 clairvoyant was able to read the Foundation operatives within the structure, housing the site's sole service elevator. Taking advantage of a shift change, Team McDonald successfully entered and disabled the guards within. Under interrogation, these guards revealed the construction of a subterranean rail network reaching to Grand Bend, Ontario, as well as rumors of tunnels beneath the bedrock. Team Steele is presently engaging in sounding Ipperwash Park to determine the precise location of either feature. The elevator has so far resisted attempts to summon it or to breach its shaft, but with the camp under OSAT control, it is only a matter of time before the Foundation is forced to face their eviction. Sergeant Gordon Shine, Chief Superintendent, OSAT. Without elevator or subway access, Site 43's topside operations were restricted to only those assets already located beyond the interdirection zone and capable of radio communication. Chief of Secretary and Containment Martin Strauss and Site 01 liaison Dr. Edward Falkirk briefed these agents and researchers daily. The briefing of Dr. Isaac Okery, thaumatologist and researcher in acroamatic abatement, for 3/10/1968 is appended below. Expand log 001-2. Dr. Falkirk. Next on the list, tell me it's not the witch doctor. Chief Strauss loudly clears his throat. Chief Strauss. Dr. Okery, do we have you on the line? Silence on recording. Dr. Okery. Yes, Marty, I hear you. Good evening, Dr. Falkirk. Silence on recording. Dr. Falkirk. I'll make this quick. Keep your head down and await further instructions. Chief Strauss. We'll have MU-43 check on you. Dr. Falkirk. Bad idea, sending good men into that neighborhood. Dr. Okery. Pardon? I live in Parkdale? Dr. Falkirk. Do a little voodoo on the real estate agent. Silence on recording. Chief Strauss. I'll check in tomorrow as Dr. Okery. Something warped one of my thaumato-semiotic wards last night. Silence on recording. Does that have an English translation? Dr. Okery.
Thalmics are vulnerable to outside interference. I've got a whole raft of mental safeguards in place, keyed to common phrases associated with hostile action: fire, obey, poison. They take a while to set up, but they protect me if someone tries to reach out with ill intent. Dr. Falkirk: if your magic brain is on the fritz, maybe we should send MU-43 in to contain you. Chief Strauss: Doctor, please, don't be so extreme. Dr. Falkirk: that's the silver lining to all this. Extremity is back on the table. Chief Strauss: which ward got triggered? Isaac? Dr. Oakrey: it didn't get triggered, it changed. The word changed. Only other thaumatologists would have been able to manage that. Dr. Falkirk: you don't think Crocker...
Dr. Oakrey:
No, I don't. It would have to be one of our own people.
Chief Strauss: odd. What was the change? Dr. Oakrey:
poison became gift.
Silence on recording. Chief Strauss:
I know exactly what that means.
Chief Strauss chuckled. Dr. Falkirk said your brain was on the fritz. He wasn't far off. Chief Strauss briefed Dr. Oakrey on the particulars of POL 382, including information which would not be incorporated into the SCP database until the late 1990s regarding Dr. Scout's unsanctioned collusion with said individual. Dr. Falkirk was not cleared for the full extent of this information. The present-day iteration of POL 382's profile is appended below. Profile POL 382. Name Thilo Zwist. Occupation Memeticist at large. Known aliases: Ida Brown, Dr. Bromide, Tolliver Broomley, Will Deaver, Mr. Gloss, Joseph Haino, Dr. Jim, Angela Mercy, Reiki Rick, Alexander Schofield, Uncle Teddy, Hammond Washburn, etc. Thilo Zwist was apprenticed into a non-existent ancient society of highly advanced cryptomancers known as the Schriftsteller, the Writers, a society of which he is now the only known surviving member. Zwist is believed to be the most proficient cryptomancer presently active on the Earth. Zwist is functionally immortal and has proven capable of producing anomalous effects on a global scale. In his youth, he altered the Germanic language family to incorporate a deadly disease trigger, accidentally, and a decade after the Panopticon Crisis ended, he insinuated a non-existent political personage into the historical record. The latter act was at the behest of the SCP Foundation, with whom he is nominally aligned. Site 43 director Dr. V. L. Scout spent many decades ostensibly pursuing Zwist, but the two were in fact engaged in a covert collaboration to advance the aims of societal survival and stability, though they would never meet in person. The primary reason for this collaboration was the resurgence of GOL 5054, the Griftschreiber, the Poison Writers, first in the form of a right-wing Canadian think tank called the Writing History Institute. For unclear reasons, the Giftschreiber have engaged in periodic attacks on societal stability worldwide. Their anarchic activities are primarily attested in the Western world, but archives and revision research have uncovered Giftschreiber activity in over 140 nations worldwide. Their attacks are invariably mimetic in nature, though the form varies. Many Giftschreibers utilize the written word, while some use images and others employ audio. Zwist himself has proven capable of using all aforementioned media, though his primary area of expertise is written memetics. His command of this skill is such that he is essentially impossible to detain, and he has gone unmolested by the Foundation since the early 1980s. Armed with the 1968 equivalent of this information, Chief Strauss advanced a theory. Via a Foundation thaumatologist in Cuba, Dr. Scout had planted a reference to the Giftschreiber in Dr. Oakrey's mind to suggest that POL 382 be contacted about crafting a cryptomatic solution to the Panopticon Crisis. This would later be proven correct. The thaumatologist in question had been Dr. Euler. As Dr. Falkirk was not cleared for this information, Chief Strauss and Dr. Oakrey planned their response in private.
2 of Site-43's mobile task forces regularly attempted pursuit of Zwist for training purposes only, and a raid on his last known place of business had in fact been in the last stages of planning, with the DND and OSAT occupation made egress impossible. Without MTF support, Dr. Okri would attempt to make contact with the Cryptomancer on 03/12/1968. Expand log 001-3. Dr. Okri approaches a row of abandoned businesses in the Harbourford district of Toronto. He activates his audio recording device. Sound of a door opening and a bell ringing. Anybody home? Sound of footsteps. I haven't seen your face before. Have you seen mine? Zwist chuckles. Not that I'd have let you remember. I'm not here to capture you, Doctor. I'm not a doctor, but you look like you might be. I've been expecting a visit. You have? There's a lot of uninvited visitors nosing about your camp lately. Thought the local wildlife would have prevented that. We've been giving the Nexus reserves fresh water for 20 years now, but we had to shut that down when OSAT closed in. I think the myth monsters are cross with us. As well they should be. One shouldn't abandon one's responsibilities just because the going gets tough. We've been under rather a lot of pressure, if you hadn't noticed. And it'll only get worse if I know Elizabeth Crocker. Do you know Elizabeth Crocker? Silence on recording. Are you here to ask for my help, or did I let you find me for no good reason? Silence on recording. I assume this place has some significance to you? Oh, quite. It is an object lesson. This bakery used to be just one link in a worldwide chain. The very first one was built in my little village of Amstetten, and I painted them a very special sign as one of my first tests in my long, long apprenticeship. Zwist sighs. It was a remarkable piece of craftsmanship. I prepared it with great care. You're talking about cryptomancy. What? I'm talking about writing, though not writing the way you'd understand it. I was a promising young writer, and my efforts paid dividends for their clients. I painted more and more signs for them, pouring everything I knew into them, and within a month there wasn't another banker in Amstetten. Within a year, they were bread maker to king and czars. Making bread, huh? Yes. Dough? Yes, thank you. The metaphor has been tired for nearly a century. You're not adding anything to it now. Sorry, you were about to get to the instructive part about how mismanagement ruined the effect? Silence on recording. We get a lot of monologuers in my business. You learn to recognize patterns. Good. Pattern recognition will be important later. I'll make my note. Some man who knew more about accounting than art began to wonder why every new franchise location required the services of some strange old painter from some obscure Austrian workshop. They stopped calling me and started knocking off copies of my sign with their own inferior materials. Even without the inaugural magic painted into the bricks of each bakery, the thing had a power all its own. But it was not strong enough to withstand long decades of progressive meddling in the name of improvement. The work was diffused, abstracted, abstrused, and in the end disabled entirely. By the time they had a worldwide empire, they also had a dead duck product. Without my work to advertise their dubious virtues, they were nothing. Silence on recording. It was never very good bread. Solid ending. I hear a few of the old bakeries stayed in business. Something of my writing lingers in the brickwork, and they still draw in the tourists. So I hear. When did all this happen? You made signs in Austria, but also in Canada? Did you emigrate after the war, or... Yes, the 30 Years' War. I made the first sign in 1637 when I was 15. Silence on recording. Back up. That would make you 346 years old? 345. Why are half the people I work with immortal? Pardon? Nothing. It's just... nothing. We all have our burdens to bear. In any case, you're saying that you can use writing and thaumatology in order to create words of power, or words of poison. And you can use that to help the Foundation? I can craft you a phrase like the one I made for the bakers. Something to distract the world at large. Make them not see you for who you are. So long as you show the sign. You can just write the words and people will ignore us? Essentially. At the very least, you will be able to move about unharassed. You'll forgive me if I'm skeptical. I would never forgive you if you weren't. But if it's proof you want, read this. Sound of paper unfurling. What is... Try moving your apple arm. Silence on recording, followed by a startled yelp from Dr. Oakrey. The hell did you do to me? I conflated the concepts of apple and right. We'll unconflate them. Sound of paper being handled. Okay, so it works, but how does it work? You're using the same words the rest of us use, and you're doing something different with them.
Yes, that's called writing.
Don't be coy. Your writing is very obviously different.
Writing is writing, smuggling concepts out of your head and into someone else's through the medium of words. A good writer can make the reader see, feel, even believe anything.
That's lovely, but most writers aren't magicians. Even the really good ones are working with established parameters.
No, they aren't. The really good ones use those parameters as a dartboard. There are underlying grammar defining the relationship of every word in every language, and when you master them, you can make them behave very strangely indeed, and to terrific effect. In the hands of a master, grammar can work even better when it's broken. I'm merely aware of a deeper layer, an underlying grammar, and applying the same principles to it.
You've lost me again.
We're both overcomplicating things, so I'll put it this way instead. Whether you're a writer or a writer, the progression is identical. You learn the system, know it inside and out, and then you subvert it. You learn the rules, then learn how to break them.
Can you explain the rules which prevent normal writing from becoming anomalous, and how to break those rules?
Yes.
When do we start?
We don't. I said I can. Under no circumstances will I do it. I have trained apprentices before, a mere handful, and it wasn't always worked out the way I'd like it. I know too much about your Foundation to want to hand you the keys to this particular taut vehicle, particularly if you've been such poor neighbors that the locals no longer vouch for you. I know what your enemies say you are, and in many ways they aren't far wrong. I've escaped through jackbooted stormtroopers to say that with confidence. I am going to help you with this, nevertheless. You deserve the chance to improve your moral backbone, and Crocker is certainly more demagogue than democrat. I will not enable you to replicate the effects afterward, however. A line must be drawn.
What precisely will your help entail, then?
I married the concept of quality to the concept of this bakery. I will divorce the concept of the Foundation from whatever is chosen.
Would an initialism work?
More adaptable than an acronym, certainly. What do you have in mind?
Well, as you might be aware, we call ourselves the SCP Found. Zwiss laughs. What?
Nothing. Yes, I have heard that. This is going to work out splendidly. 1 week after this meeting, Zwiss presented Dr. Oakrey with an anomalous logo design for the non-existent Scout's cargo packing and the chemical formula for an inoculant, later developed into Antimeme 001. As Zwiss' dealings with Dr. Scout were at this time unknown to the Foundation at large, Dr. Oakrey claimed to have captured these items during his supposed raid. A quorum of the site director's executive committee of the whole rejected the use of this untested thaumaturgy, but in light of the Foundation's vastly reduced budget and the absence of safer solutions, they were overruled by the O5 Council. The logo was printed on moving vans under Zwiss' covert direction, and the Foundation's first Panopticon Crisis era front company was commissioned. Its cover as a courier service allowed for the transport of personnel and materials across North America without interference from various world governments, allowing for the limited re-establishment of supply lines between various sites across the continental United States, Canada, Mexico, and Central America. OSAT was ejected from Camp Ipperwash, and Dr. Scout was able to return to Site 43. Dr. Euler became a consultant for Scout's cargo packing, as he was very eager to examine Swift's work and attempt to decipher it. With the crisis by no means over, extending this cryptomantic umbrella over the entirety of the Foundation was designated an Alpha 1 priority. That project therefore became, by default, SCP-001. Addendum 001-2, Creation of the Frontispiece. In May of 1968, a collision along Route 66 in the central United States rendered an instance of Swift's work unusable. He had stressed to Dr. Oakrey that the products of his writing were dangerous if damaged, and Dr. Oakrey therefore personally supervised the achromatic abatement of such instances whenever accidents occurred. This particular instance and its handlers, Dr. Euler among them, were stopped at the Canadian border by enemy agents. The ensuing incident is recounted by Dr. Euler in his testimony, excerpted below. Expand log 001-4. Agent Kirkhope. Beginning recording. Agent Louis Kirkhope, acting as an interrogator in the matter of a skirmish at the Canadian border between the Foundation and an unknown faction. Dr. Euler. The CIA, I'm telling you. Agent Kirkhope. State your name, occupation, and security clearance for the record, please. For the love of... Eric Euler, approved thaumatologist 001-4. You may begin your testimony at any time, Doctor. It was about noon when we were going to cross over into Canada. We were told that our transport was going to get extra screening, just to make sure we weren't taking contraband into the country. As a hazard we knew we were going to run into with the courier cover, but on the other side we found, well, I'm just going to say it again, they were effing CIA agents. How could you tell? There was a woman leading them with a very distinctive haircut, cropped very short, sort of a pompadour almost. I thought she was a man at first, but then she spoke. Brown hair, about 5'2", brown eyes, scar on her upper lip, insisted on being addressed as doctor as opposed to agent? Yes, her lip looked like it had been bitten by something. I recognized her from the files we were given. It was Elizabeth Crocker. If she has a doctorate, we've not located it. After the bags were put over our heads, we were driven somewhere remote. Still over the border, I knew that much. Didn't go back over the bridge. When the bags came off, it was night, and they were preparing something. They'd gotten a van that looked like ours and had rounded it into a tree, getting ready to set it on fire. They were already loading men into it to make it look like we had died in a crash. I panicked. I don't know if it was the bags or the fire and the way those agents marched, but it was too much for me. Silence on recording. It's lucky American anti-thermic measures are decades behind, or else I may not have gotten out. What did you do exactly? I was handcuffed. My thaumatology is a sort of, I don't want to call it alchemy, but it's essentially magical chemistry. I can take things, solid things, and reduce them to their base components. I can also repurpose them. The handcuffs I was wearing, for instance, steel, easy to take the iron out, and leave highly brittle carbon in its place, while infusing my bones with the metal for a bit of reinforcement. So that's what I did, and then I just tried to do the same thing to everything around me. To what effect? I knew Crocker herself was a mage, but she was stronger than I thought. She managed to confound my rights somewhat. Instead of splitting molecules, they were reformed into something new. She made it rain, using magic that's supposed to make it easier to start fires. I thought I was going to die, that we were all going to die, but one of my rights went wild in a way, hit the frontispiece on the side of the van and reduced it. I beg your pardon? That's what I've been calling the thing, hidden in our acronym, the frontispiece. The first thing anyone sees of us, and hopefully the last thing they'll think of when it comes to us. I hit the frontispiece, the SCP initialism, and reduced it. In that reduction I saw, well, it might be better if I just showed you. Can I borrow a pen? One moment. Sound of scratching as Dr. Euler draws an unusual pattern on a piece of paper. Footnote 14. Retroactively identified as a fractal after Benoit Mandelbrot. Concretized.
The terminology in 1975. Agent Kirkhope. Don't be alarmed. You're just talking backwards. Let me just... Further scribbling sounds. And look at that. What the heck was that? It felt like it was inside my head. It was. Swiss lied. There aren't any secret grammars to his writing. There are patterns. Patterns arcane and anomalous, while simultaneously completely natural. Dr. Euler taps the paper. This was embedded in the R in the word cargo. I believe its original intent was to reverse attention, but I've adapted it to reverse speech. That explains how Crocker saw through it. She's a cryptomancer. Her thaumatology deals in codes and hidden patterns. She's probably at least partially immune to Swiss work. But how did you escape? In the Essence Scouts, there was a pattern. I won't draw it here, don't worry. That aided in miscommunication. I isolated it and imposed that pattern on the eyes of every CIA agent who was there. In a way, I imitated Migdal Bavil. I don't follow. Let me put it a bit more plainly then. Where do we get the word Babel from? Dear God. We got in the car and drove back here to 43. Matches up with the testimony from the others. This reduction process you use. How much knowledge do you retain from it when you use it on pen and paper? They did experiments on me when I was inducted into the Foundation. Maybe 3 pages of material, double-spaced. But it fades that pattern I drew, and the counteragent is the last of it. Could you do it again? Write it down as it comes to you? Don't tell me you mean to replicate the work. What Swiss does is impossibly complex. I get a migraine just thinking about it. Silence on recording. But tell me, how does achromatic abatement process textual anomalies? The destruction of all non-functioning instances was halted in order to subject them to more rigorous investigation. Dr. Euler formed the Mimesis and Cryptomancy Research Group with achromatic abatement specialists Dr. Okri and Dr. Ilse Reynitz. As the latter suffered from a condition which did not permit her to leave a sealed chamber at Site 43, communicating only through its single window, O5 Command reassigned Dr. Euler to that facility. SCP-001 instance damaged. It was quickly determined that, contrary to Swiss warnings, examples of his writing did not become universally fatal when damaged. Their cognito-italic qualities instead took on new, though admittedly mostly undesirable, attributes. Dr. Euler began breaking down each damaged instance via thaumaturgy. Dr. Raiders designed microscopy equipment capable of examining the decomposed cryptomancy at the atomic level, while Dr. Okri researched remote reading and the collective unconscious in order to better understand how Swiss powers acted so effectively on human communications. Meanwhile, what remained of the Foundation's facilities in the Soviet Union was slowly being destroyed. The GRU Psychotronics Division's inexperience with, or outright apathy toward Foundation containment methods resulted in over 70 anomalies breaching within Soviet territories during the 1960s. This culminated in June of 1968, with the Soviets raiding an isolated, abandoned biological containment site near Lake Baikal, unleashing an anomalous mutagenic virus resulting in data expunged. This is widely considered one of the most disastrous events of the Panopticon Crisis and has resulted in Leonid Brezhnev issuing the order to surrender all remaining Foundation facilities. Threatened with overwhelming force, Overwatch reluctantly agreed. A hurried evacuation commenced. A shipping container labeled with the insignia of a former Foundation front company was discovered by operatives embedded in the port of Los Angeles in July 2, 1968, containing a badly beaten but still alive Site 3 director, Abrasha Sokolsky. The following note was pinned to his necktie. "Can you feel the noose yet?" Unbeknownst to the Soviets, Site 120, Czestochowa, Poland, remained operational. Personnel had evacuated into the extra-dimensional free port of Esterberg, accessible via a way, within Site 120, 10 days prior to Soviet occupation. In the process, they removed all documentation and took with them whatever anomalies were feasible to contain within a pocket dimension. Brezhnev's orders would have resulted in the deaths of dozens of biological and/or sapient anomalies if not for the actions of Anna Wojcik, a Site 120 thaumaturge. Wojcik was able to curry favor with the Kapusa Basiliska, a Polish sect of the Serpent's Hand, whose views ran counter to Soviet interests. The Kapusa mobilized Allied cells along the USSR to care for the isolated anomalies and maintain containment where necessary. While inevitably many items were still lost, Europe and Asia were spared an undoubtedly cataclysmic mass containment failure due to the efforts of the Kapusa Basiliska and Wojcik. This uncharacteristic cooperation is credited as a major reason for the warmer relations between the Foundation and the anomalous community in Eastern Europe today as compared with the rest of the world. It was a scientific breakthrough in late July of 1968, however, which was to permanently alter the course of the Panopticon Crisis. Expand log 001-5. Dr. Oakry. Where are we at with the thaumatology, Eric? Dr. Euler. I think I've just about worked it out. I've never tried disintegrating something in such a targeted manner. You understand? It's normally enough just to destroy a thing. Destroying in such a way that you can still see how it was originally put together, well, that's tricky. Dr. Oakry. The monitoring equipment is built, though it isn't quite what we'd hoped for. The whole supply chain is in ruins, and Ilse's specifications were exacting, but we've done the research, and I think I know what to look for. It's going to be delicate at first, but we can make it work. Dr. Oakry sighs, because we have no choice. Silence on recording. You've been awfully quiet, Ilse. Dr. Renders. I don't talk when I don't have anything to say. That's time I could spend listening and thinking. What are you thinking about? I'm thinking about Scout's cargo packing. Why did he call it that? Why was that the sign he chose to work with? Scout's his nemesis. They've been playing cat and mouse for decades. It's a joke at the director's expense. Is it? Did he need to use the SCP acronym to make that joke? I've always thought the acronym was already a joke. I can't really stand for Secure, Contain, Protect. That's gibberish as a name. It doesn't stand for anything. Just like Scout's cargo packing. Doesn't mean anything. Perfect fit. But is that the simplest possible explanation? What could be simpler? Something in the words themselves made that specific string of characters work better for his purposes. The joke was just a blind to make it seem like there was no deeper reasoning. Zwist is older than Canada, Ilse. His mind is a labyrinth. You're not going to get far trying to parse his underlying mental grammar. Silence on recording. Grammar. It's all about grammar, isn't it? This is a man who can infect grammar with diseases. There's obviously a scientific or thaumatological basis for all of this, but what if there's also a grammatical one, too? Go on. What if he's not just exploiting unnatural... No. What if he's not just employing supernatural mechanisms, but also linguistic mechanisms? What if his cryptomancy works because it's magic and because it exploits the rules of language? Dr. Reynolds gasps. She pounds her forehead with the palm of one hand. Oh, pop the drawer. What? She's cursing, mildly. I'm right, of course I'm right. It's so obvious. Make it obvious for us, too? The string of characters might be important, but it's the acronym he's exploiting. And, oh, good lord, we can exploit it, too. We're going to do incredible things, gentlemen. Ilse? SCP. For decades, they've already been... How did we get that lucky? How did I miss it? I have a degree in literary studies. I should have seen this right away. SCP. Dr. Reynolds laughs. More words in English start with those letters than with any others.
Dr. Reynolds theorized that this apparent accident of grammar had aided the construction of Swiss cryptomancy and might allow for far more comprehensive applications once the field of study was better understood. If the Scouts' cargo packing emblem did in fact rely on the SCP acronym, then the Foundation would not necessarily need to create many new fronts to alleviate its international pressure. The thaumaturgic processes functioning within the existing sign could, in theory, be transferred to another without completely understanding the means by which Zwist had set them in motion. The site director's executive committee of the whole recommended that work on this stopgap measure be matched with a parallel program of research into the actual origins of Swiss cryptomancy. The following day, after a mass containment breach occurred in site at Area 97, due to poorly maintained facilities, the O5 Council again overrode their concerns. Simpson Center for Policy Signage. Though the practice had fallen out of favor in the post-war period, many early front organizations had already employed the SCP acronym in their titles for purposes of deniability. Site 43 itself had immediate access to two of these: Lake Huron Supply Control and Purification, the surface front for Site 43's Achromatic Abatement Network, and the Simpson Center for Policy, a depreciated think tank in Toronto, which served as the original front for what became Site 43's Archives and Revision section. As these fronts still had public-facing functions, however, Dr. Scout would not release them for thaumaturgic experimentation until the working theory was proven correct. In August, the Foundation lost contact with Regional Command in South Africa. Agent Crocker had infiltrated Site 52 in Johannesburg some years prior under the alias Dr. Gabriel Fish, and in that time had been inciting distrust between white and black personnel throughout the region. This culminated in Regional Director Rupert Jansen issuing an ultimatum on 16 August 1968 that all non-white Foundation personnel be removed from the country immediately or else face execution. This was only possible due to the fact that Dr. Anhe Veritin, their previous regional commander, had been de facto removed from her position by way of being stranded with her family in the central United States by the 1967 Radio Silence Order. Crocker's manipulations led to the loss of over 200 members Foundation personnel, along with the last site south of the Congo. The only active facility in Africa until the end of the Panopticon Crisis would be Site 27 in Tanzania, presumably overlooked due to its isolated location and the low-risk anomalies contained within. Crocker executed Jansen, then proceeded to give the Fuchs administration access to anomalies they would use to attempt to silence the anti-apartheid movement, gaining traction throughout the nation. Jansen's freeze-dried but thawing corpse was discovered by a routine patrol of the Site 19 interdiction zone. Following these developments, a note in his jacket pocket: "You're running out of continents." On 09/03/1968, Drs. Euler and Oakrey successfully isolated a series of stable, unidentified anomalous particles in the abatement residue from a Scout's cargo packing instance. Dr. Renard's monitoring equipment had been so precisely tuned that the research group believed they should be capable of reapplying these particles to a new logo, potentially recreating the effect with a different front organization. A meeting was held with Drs. Scout and Falkirk to develop potential candidates. Expand log 001-6. Dr. Oakrey: "Alright, first things first. Existing orgs we can hollow out while we set up more permanent ones." Dr. Reynolds: "If we ever have the funds to do that again, you mean?" Dr. Scout: "Canadian Psychological Association." Dr. Oakrey: "How was that SCP?" Dr. Scout: "Société Canadienne de Psychologie. I could name a dozen other French-Canadian groups." Dr. Falkirk: "As if that matters. Got anything in English?" Dr. Reynolds: "Snap, crackle, pop." All laugh. Dr. Reynolds: "What?" Dr. Oakrey: "TV commercial." Dr. Reynolds: "Wouldn't know."
Dr. Scout. There's the Social Credit Party in Alberta. Dr. Falkirk. Good choice. They already act strangely. Dr. Oakrey. The Socreds or Albertans? Dr. Falkirk. Yes. Dr. Oakrey. Okay. Silence on recording. Wait, are we talking about buying these things or seizing them? Dr. Scout. We're not buying anything anymore, Isaac. I'm afraid we're talking about seizure, while we still possess the means to seize. Dr. Euler. Well, let's be optimistic. Brainstorm a few new orgs. Dr. Falkirk. Shanghai cart pullers, Scottish college professionals. Dr. Scout. Skincare products, shellfish canners of Portsmouth, South Carolina penguins, shark... No, that doesn't work. I don't know. These things write themselves. Dr. Oakrey. Maybe, but we need at least one really good one to start with. Our first test case. We can afford to fake up one company, surely. Preferably one that does something we actually need. Silence on recording. Dr. Euler. A consultancy firm for managing logistics. Dr. Reynolds. We're listening. Dr. Euler. Shell Construction Partnership. Dr. Scout. Yes. Dr. Oakrey. Yes. Dr. Falkirk. Damn it, yes. On 09/15/1968, Dr. Euler broke down a fresh, undamaged instance of SCP-001 and with Dr. Oakrey's assistance transferred the anomalous particles to signage for the Shell Construction Partnership. Class D personnel exposed to the new instance experienced disorientation and a lack of recognition of their surroundings. While the effect was nowhere near as strong as with the Scout's cargo packing emblem, the results were nevertheless extremely promising. It was assumed, as would later be proven correct, that Zwist performed additional thaumaturgy during the application of his art, which could not be replicated without his aid. The company was put into full operation and began managing the legal and material processes for the creation of new fronts utilizing the SCP initialism. After acquiring numerous subcontractors and setting up separate offices in 5 major North American cities, the Shell Construction Partnership came under legal threat by the Royal Dutch Shell Petroleum Conglomerate. It is believed that Agent Crocker was responsible for alerting them to the front's existence. Shell asserted that the new company was guilty of serious copyright infringement. However, they proved unable to successfully execute their lawsuit due to persistent confusion, demotivation, and even amnesia on the part of their legal counsel, particularly in preliminary hearings with the partnership's own counsel. The hastily empowered fictional law firm of Sloan, Corbin, and Pavia, providing the ultimate proof that the research group's program of study was a promising one. Dr. Euler began studying the composition and behavior of the anomalous particles in earnest, while Dr. Reynolds conducted research into linguistic and paralinguistic theory. Dr. Oakrey was further able to occlude the activities of the Simpson Center for Policy and Lake Huron Supply Control and Purification, but no further progress on this front was made in 1968. Zwist had determined that enemy action could not possibly be responsible for the damaging the quantity of his writing Dr. Oakrey had asked him to replace. Surmising that the Foundation was now attempting to reverse engineer his work, he therefore cut off all contact. Months of intensive study followed, and on 02/17/1969, the research group submitted the following to the O5 Council. Expand Log 001-7. Research Field Proposal. Quantum Linguophysics. Dr. Eric Euler, Dr. Isaac Oakrey, Dr. Ilse Reynolds. Summary. Thousands of discrete achromatic abatement processes carried out upon instances of a complex piece of cryptomancy confiscated from POL 382, unaligned thaumatologist Thilo Zwist, have revealed an entire new field of scientific study. By thaumatologically breaking these instances down to the atomic level and examining the results, we have been able to discover a particle basis of anomalous semantic interference. When all non-anomalous material was discarded, what remained was 5 new anomalous particles in a family we have termed linguinons, Extensive experimentation has identified them as phonemions, which affect the irreducible building blocks of meaning, the quantum of language; morphemions, which alter words; syntaxions, which strengthen, weaken, or detach the glue binding words into meaningful concepts; semantations, which inflect the meaning of words to such context; orthons, which connect symbols to concepts. It is our belief that POL 382 and his historical colleagues produced these particles thaumaturgically. It is our further belief that given sufficient time and resources, the process can be replicated. The decomposition of anomalous sentences produces syntaxation and semantations as a byproduct. Sentences emit semantations when interacting with other sentences. The decomposition of anomalous individual words produces phenomenons, the base linguanon unit. Words are bound into sentences through strategic bombardment of orthons. The method of producing orthons is unclear. We are therefore limited to the use of whatever orthons can be salvaged from existing examples of POL 382's work. Developing rigorous techniques for applying these processes will allow us to replicate, though initially in a crude manner, his cryptomantic effects. The emblem of POL 382 created for Scout's cargo packing, which generates an impenetrable aura of secrecy around it, is an excellent case study for describing the effects of each particle. We separated all varieties of linguanon save one from an instance of the sign and observed its effects on observers. With only the phenomenons present, the sign gave observers an inexplicable sense of something being off. The morphemions caused observers to forget the meanings of the words scouts, cargo, and packing. The syntaxions made the sign immensely fascinating. The semantions caused observers to associate the words scout, cargo, and packing with concepts related to secrecy or stealth. The orthons, most startlingly, revealed the existence of the SCP Foundation to observers. Each particle introduced a new nuance into the existing symbology of the English language words imprinted on the sign, working in concert to produce the effacing effect. Proposal. Based on these findings, we assert the need for a comprehensive schedule of research into what we call quantum linguiphysics. The end goal of this schedule is the achievement of what we are calling pragmatics, complete mastery over the field of cryptomancy, including the artificial production of each particle, orthons in particular. To demonstrate the attainment of that goal, we commit to the eventual production of an overarching thaumaturgic shield for all SCP Foundation activities, tentatively named the Frontispiece. Working in concert with linguanon-saturated imagery, this measure should permanently diffuse the present geopolitical crisis. Executive Summary. Quantum linguiphysics will allow the SCP Foundation to redefine the relationship between actual and perceptual reality. The Site Director's Executive Council of the Whole strenuously objected to this project on the basis of its potential to injure the combined cognition of mankind. The research group acknowledged this point in private correspondence with Site-01. The O5 Council's response was to suspend all meetings of the Executive Council until the conclusion of the Panopticon Crisis, at which point they would be free to again air their concerns. SCP-001 Instance. Crocker's campaign against the Foundation continued. In early February, whilst the Foundation was attempting to negotiate a new treaty with the People's Republic of China, she used cryptomancy to instill a sense of severe paranoia in Chairman Mao Zedong, who had made the unusual decision to attend the talks in person. Mao specifically believed that the proxy of O510, Dr. Amity Noble, was wearing recording equipment broadcasting to Western intelligence gathering bases. The talks rapidly deteriorated until Mao ordered the People's Liberation Army to forcibly eject the Foundation representatives. While Dr. Noble was able to escape unharmed, this event left the Foundation without any foothold in China until after the end of the Cold War. Dr. Noble discovered a note in her personal effects upon arriving safely at Site-01.
5 minutes to midnight. Crocker went on to infiltrate Site-95, footnote 18, a facility discovered by the Foundation in Alaska, notable for containing 12 large rooms whose gravity matches that found on other bodies in the solar system while maintaining a terrestrial atmosphere, making it useful for testing of space technology. The origin of this facility remains unclear. For a period of 2 months, she alerted President Nixon to its existence, and Nixon ordered the U.S. Army to storm and occupy the facility for the sake of national security. It is believed that U.S. GOV intended to use Site-95 to falsify photographic evidence in the event that the Apollo program proved fruitless. Ultimately, Apollos 9 through 12, 14 through 17, and 19 were all successful in their missions to the moon, with Apollo 13 famously suffering a mechanical error and Apollo 18 redacted, rendering the occupation moot. Site-95 would only be ceded back to the Foundation in November of 2001. As the urgency of the Frontispiece project mounted, Drs. Euler, Oakry, and Renders began confronting the reality of what they were about to do. It became apparent that only direct contact with and alteration of the collective human consciousness would be able to effect the changes required to make the Frontispiece operative. Having intensively studied the budding field of noetics via the works of chemist Vladimir Verendesky and philosopher Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, Dr. Oakry declared the experiment technically possible. Troubled by the moral implications and desiring to commit their reasoning to posterity, however, each doctor typed a single note to be opened only when the full history of this event might finally be written. Expand log 001-8. From the letter of Ilse Renders. Communication. It's the only way I interact with the world. Well, that's not strictly true, but the only thing I can see, the only thing that feels completely real, is the effect my words have on the people who come to my window. The looks on their faces, the way they respond. It's the closest thing to human contact I've had in, I hardly remember how long. This is my chance to reach out and touch the entire human race. That makes this project very, very important to me personally, because it's the reason I'm doing it. I have to stop. This can't be about me. It has to be about everyone else, the 3.5 billion people on the other side of my window. If I'm going to send them all a message, it has to be a meaningful one. Of course, there's already something poetic about contacting our entire species all at once, no matter the context or the content. I wish I could tell the difference between my reasoning and my rationalizing. From the desk of Isaac Oakry. Falkirk used to cycle his insults, but he hasn't called me anything new in months. It's witch doctor this and witch doctor that, day after day. I used to wonder why they let him stay here, with his attitude, and then they promoted him to O5 liaison, and I started wondering if that attitude is the entire reason they keep him around. He doesn't trust anyone who isn't like him. He's closed-minded and mean-spirited. He's the closest thing we have to Elizabeth Crocker at Site 43. Is Overwatch hedging their bets? Waiting to see if he's right not to trust me and Euler and the communists and the Cubans and the Hungarians and anyone else who hasn't had a few decades to settle into the status quo? Are we fascists? Because we're certainly not bleeding hearts. Do we even deserve to win this fight? All this speculation popped into my head a few weeks ago, and I've been trying to figure out why it never occurred to me before. Then I looked over the specs for Project Frontispiece, and I thought about what we were planning to do, and what if Falkirk is right? What if Crocker's right? They aren't. I just wish I knew that they were fully, completely, absolutely, and definitely wrong. From the desk of Eric Euler. I'm starting to have doubts. Why didn't I have them from the start? This thing we're doing is so close now. I can see its vast and terrible shape. The pragmatics are so well sorted that I can even begin considering it abstractly. So I have been. That was a mistake. Abstractly, I am reminded of my family back in Germany, the ones who aren't really there anymore. I wonder if they would be proud of the work I'm doing, or if they would have recognized it as something else. Would they see this the way I see it, the way I want to see it, as an act in the service of a greater good? Or would they see straight through that tired cliché? Would they see me boldly and plainly for what I am, a scientist in an isolated camp preparing to
No. I refuse to reductio ad hetelum myself. But the question remains, why am I doing this? Are my motives pure? Let's see, yes or no? Are you doing this just to see if you can? No. Is it safe? No. I don't know. Can we afford to wait for a safer solution? I don't know. There's no way to be sure. Would you do this if a safer solution had already presented itself? No. Will you feel guilty about it in the end? Yes. But I'm going to do it anyway, aren't I? And once it's been done, Isaac and Ilse and I will be the only people alive who know precisely how to do it again. Will they let us put this genie back in its bottle? Will we let them rush us along the easy road again? Do we even have the leverage to stop them from doing so? What if we've given them the tools to take that choice away from us? And is it enough to do this thing once, only once, and never more? Is that how we forgive ourselves? No. We don't forgive ourselves. We refuse to. There's no making this right. The end is justified, but the means are not, even though there are no other means. There is only one choice, and it's the wrong one, and we have to make it anyway. Afterward, when we've ensured that there will be an afterward, each of us will be a living reminder that we need to do much, much better. The brutality of Crocker's methods continued to increase. She began killing Foundation personnel indiscriminately, using cryptomantic runes to induce targeted cardiac arrests or aneurysms. The runes would then dissipate before causing collateral damage. In May of 1969, Crocker used one of the first known instances of an auditory cryptomantic agent, embedded in a recording of the Beatles' I Wanna Hold Your Hand, to kill 10 members of the Foundation personnel meeting in a safe house in Edinburgh, Scotland. SCP-001 instance. To be continued next week in this part 2 of the Frontispiece.